Hello. If you've watched some of my other videos, you might have noticed that I'm quite a bit on the left, but I wasn't always this way. You see, I used to be an anti-feminist. Anti-feminism is the idea that feminism has largely outlived its cause because men and women are now equal under the law, and that means problems solved, just like the way we solved racism by voting for Barack Obama. Other than that, anti-feminists are mostly preoccupied with reacting to cringy BuzzFeed videos about manspreading, which, let's be honest guys, wasn't a great look for leftism. We can do better. But what's most fascinating about anti-feminism is that they seem to actually be able to point to a lot of problems in the world with the gender norms as they are. For instance, if you ask an anti-feminist what it's like to be a man in a current-day society, they'll give you a pretty compelling argument as to why we should abolish patriarchal gender norms. But they are seemingly incapable of recognizing that it's part of a bigger picture, and instead see these issues as completely devoid from any societal implications. Take child custody courts, for example. It's a favorite amongst anti-feminists, and the argument goes as follows. Child custody courts generally rule in favor of women more than in favor of men. Now, their argument is that, and it stops there. That's just the observation, and it's bad. No explanation as to how that came about, just this is a thing, and it's bad. Same with men in the military, for example. They'll point to the fact that men are overwhelmingly the ones dying in war and say, well, see, men aren't privileged. They die in wars. But as to the reason why men are disproportionately the ones to die in wars, well, they're not concerned with that. They're just concerned with shutting down the idea that men are privileged in certain ways. And they do that by pointing out that in some other ways, they're not privileged. The point is that if you ask a feminist as to why these issues are the case, they'll be able to explain to you that yes, men are privileged in certain ways, but that privilege stems from the patriarchal gender norms that hurt everyone, including men. Take child custody court cases, for example. Yes, it's true that typically hurts men, but that same gender norm, the idea that mothers are better child carers than fathers, hurts women in different ways. You see, as a man, no one will ever question if I really want to pursue a professional career because it could interfere with child caring. As a man, no one expects me to become a father. That's different for women, where they are mothers and childbearers first and individuals second. What can be especially fascinating is when these ideas of an anti-feminist seem to be at odds. They will often simultaneously hold the belief that it's bad that men disproportionately die in wars, but then also argue against women joining the military because they would be weak little crybabies that would weaken the military as a whole. Which makes you wonder, which is it? Do you want women in the military or not? Do you actually care about the disproportionate amount of deaths in war that befall to men? Or is it just a meaningless talking point to you to shut down the idea of male privilege? These inherent contradictions in anti-feminist rhetoric exist because anti-feminists simultaneously recognize the problems with the traditional gender roles that we have today when it hurts men, but also seek to maintain the social structures that keep it in place. They don't want to admit that they benefit from the system, but they do recognize that in certain places they are hurt by it. It also follows from the fact that they want to upkeep these social systems that they're generally opposed to any kind of progressive thought, including things like gay and trans liberation. Now, by this point in time, you might be wondering how an intelligent young man, such as myself, would get tangled up in such a mess. Well, let me tell you, it's a tale as old as time itself. A young, impressionable mind is watching their daily dose of gaming content when suddenly a video pops up in their recommended feed. SJW cringe compilation. That sounds fascinating. Before they know it, they're being taught that feminists are trying to ruin the game industry by pushing for a lot of gay people in there, and forced diversity. They're ruining video games. And these people think, oh no, but I like video games. I don't want them to be worse. And yeah, video games are pretty bad lately. Not as good as they used to be. The fact that what they used to be is heavily influenced by childhood nostalgia when they didn't really care to look beyond the basic gameplay of the game, and the fact that capitalist corporate structures push to not making the best kind of art that someone can make, but instead make the kind of content that would make the most amount of money, i.e. loot boxes. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that they feel like video games have gotten worse. And these people give an explanation. It's feminism. And before you know it, they're being exposed to the likes of Steven Crowder and Sargon of Akkad, who would tell you that evil Muslim terrorists are trying to destroy Europe, and that communists are trying to steal your toothbrush. It's in this alt-right pipeline when these anti-feminists are exposed to more and more extremist ideas. And soon enough, they'll be taught that feminism isn't bad on its own, but that it's part of a much greater plot. This plot is cultural Marxism, which they are led to believe is a group of extreme left communists trying to destroy the West. They hate everything you know and love, even you as an individual. They hate that you are a straight, cis, white man, because you would be an oppressor. And this paints feminism in a different light. Checking your privilege is no longer recognizing the systems of power and how you unfairly benefit from them. It's instead checking how much of an oppressor you are, checking how much you need to bow down to minorities, which scares a lot of people. In reality, cultural Marxism is directly related to cultural Bolshevism, a Nazi conspiracy theory about how all the Bolsheviks, or Marxists, are planning to destroy the West. It's actually quite shocking how quickly you can go from watching SJW cringe compilation number 384 to hearing someone regurgitate Nazi rhetoric to you, just barely rephrased enough so the average viewer doesn't pick up on it. People often think that fascist content is limited to the far outskirts of the internet, only being found on BitChute and presented by a guy in a gas mask in front of a swastika flag. But unfortunately, it's not entirely true. The amount of times I've heard content creators with millions of subscribers talk about genuine Nazi rhetoric, or at least rhetoric that a Nazi would use, is staggering. In a debate with streamer Destiny, JonTron, a very popular YouTuber with almost 6.5 million subscribers, turned out to be a white nationalist.
See, look, it's happening now. I mean, what is it that's so offensive about white people saying they would like to preserve their demographic majority?
And who could forget about our favorite Minecraft-playing YouTube behemoth, PewDiePie? Well known for paying a few Indians to hold up a sign saying "Death to all Jews," and then in his apology, wearing a shirt with something that is suspiciously close to an iron cross, which, although he excused himself for all of that, neo-Nazis didn't seem to mind that it was a Georgian cross. They seem to be quite pleased with it. In fact, PewDiePie holds a quite large audience of neo-Nazis that seem to think he is, quote, our guy. Now, I'm not saying that PewDiePie is definitely a Nazi or not a Nazi. For one, because this video isn't about him, and for two, because we can never really know what someone believes. Even if PewDiePie were to turn on his camera, look directly into the lens and say, I think Hitler was right. I want to establish a white ethno-state to secure the future of the Aryan race, and I think the Jews are to blame for everything. People could still excuse it by saying it was just jokes, or just edgy humor. We can never be 100% certain as to what someone's intentions are, but we can look at what they do and what effect that has. The reason why people like me on the left don't like this kind of content isn't because we hate comedy or don't have any humor. Edgy humor can be really good if it's done well. problem is that a lot of this kind of humor isn't edgy to challenge the world on its predispositions to what is acceptable language. It's simply offensive to be offensive. It's edgy to be edgy. And that is just not funny. Apart from not being funny at all, it also creates an incredibly toxic community for anyone, well, that isn't a straight cis white male. It also ignores the fact that comedy has real meaning. Jokes don't exist in a vacuum in which they're completely devoid from any meaning and reality. Look at Stone Toss Comics, for example. Stone Toss is a genuine, Holocaust-denying neo-Nazi. Comedy, like Stone Toss's comics, have a very clear message, and in Stone Toss's case, that message is black people don't belong here, gay and trans people are degenerate, and it's all orchestrated by the Jews. And this shows from the comics that he makes. In some cases, it's not even very subtle. Excusing this kind of content as just jokes or just another type of content is actually quite bad. If we allow content from genuine fascists and white nationalists like Stone Toss to exist in the public discourse, even if that specific content isn't problematic, at least not on the surface, the likelihood of people consuming those ideas and getting dragged further and further into the alt-right pipeline is just way too big to ignore. American neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist Richard Spencer, most famous for being punched in the face while showing off a Pepe pin,
Pepe's become kind of a symbol,
has said that people like Sargon of Akkad are, and I quote, great entry points. So what should we do about it? Well, for one, I don't want the state anywhere near this. Unless people are directly inciting violence, I don't want the state anywhere near freedom of speech. So, what about the platforms? Well, I wouldn't exactly shed much tears if someone like Stone Toss is banned from every platform in the world, considering the vile things he puts in his comics. But we can't always count on platforms to do the work, especially because a lot of the problematic content is much more subtle than outright fascism. You see, not every fascist openly talks about how Jews control the world. Most do it a lot more subtly. We call this dog whistling. Take the 1350 dog whistle, for example. 1350 refers to FBI crime statistics, in which 13% of the US population, African Americans, are responsible for 50% of murder, allegedly. That's the theory. Now, there's a lot wrong with that, and we can get to that some other time. But the point now is that how would YouTube regulate this? Because when pressed on it, people will not admit that what they're saying is that black people are inherently more violent. What a racist would say is that, well, they're just citing statistics. It's just a fact. We don't like facts. It's just a fact. It's FBI crime statistics. They're real. It's not fake news. What are you talking about? And it's something that's much more difficult to police, but it is quite harmful. Getting people to believe that black people are inherently more violent can lead into more and more extreme beliefs. So how could a platform police this? YouTube can't just ban the use of FBI crime statistics on their website, and, well, as far as intent goes, that's not always clear. So that leaves us, the community. What can we do to help prevent the alt-right pipeline from functioning as well as it does? Well, point one is to educate. Knowing when you're being dog whistled to and making sure that other people know when they're being dog whistled to is a very important step. It can bring back that gut rejection that a lot of people have lost from being constantly exposed to Nazi ideology. Number two is making sure that it doesn't go uncalled out. If you're in a community that's very toxic and that spams its chats full of Nazi ideologies, well, it's a bad thing. Even if it's ironic, it can remove the gut rejection that people have of Nazi symbols and Nazi rhetoric, and that can be very dangerous. Without that gut rejection, someone might not click away when they're being exposed to more extreme views or more convincing arguments. And as always, remember, telling people that Stone Toss is a Nazi is praxis.